Good evening. Why don't we get started? It's, I think, just about 6:30. So my name is Martha Torrey, and I'm with Sunnybrook's Board of Directors, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Sunnybrook this evening. They say change is the only constant, and that's certainly true of tonight's topic. Social media didn't exist when many of us in the room were growing up, but you would be hard-pressed to find someone growing up today who hasn't heard of it or who isn't using it regularly as a way of connecting with their peers and the world. It's changed the way people communicate, and that's certainly true for our kids and grandkids. They're living in a very different reality. Having the technology to reach out to the world at your fingertips can be a powerful and positive tool, but it can also cut people down very publicly and result in some very dark outcomes. If you find it challenging to keep on top of all these social media platforms, and even more difficult to try and offer some direction and protection to those you love, you are not alone. But take heart. That's what this evening's lecture is all about. Over the next 2 hours, you'll learn about how these platforms work, the rules around their use, and some of the mental health challenges that our youth are facing. Most importantly, you'll learn about what can be done to help. We're very fortunate to have an incredible expert panel guiding us through these topics. Helping lead us through tonight's discussion is Dr. David Kreindler, the head of the Division of Youth Psychiatry. Dr. Kreindler's clinical work focuses on complex cases of mood and anxiety in youth. He's also involved in research, which includes the clinical application of handheld computers. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Kreindler to the podium.
Okay, good evening. Thanks very much, Martha. And a very good evening to everyone joining us here at Bayview Campus and also watching remotely through the webcast. Time flies, as they say, and this is the last lecture of our fall season. We'll be taking a break next month, but have a great lineup of talks planned for the new year. Please be sure to join our mailing list and to check the Sunnybrook website for more details in coming weeks. Tonight, our presentation is called Navigating Social Media, a guide for parents and grandparents, and we have a great lineup of experts. Our first two presenters, Sivan Karen Young and Jessica Lepore, will look at how social media platforms work, the benefits and dangers, current policies, and cyberbullying. Dr. Carolyn Bolus will then discuss mood disorders stemming from social media use. Finally, Michael Callis will join us to help explain more about a Sunnybrook program to help. We'll set some time aside at the end of the evening for you to ask our panel of speakers some questions. For the Q&A session, we have placed small blank white cards on each chair. Please write your questions on the card, and between each speaker, our volunteers will be collecting them from you. Just raise your hand and they will come around. Feel free to get up if you need to during the evening, as we will not be taking a formal break. The washrooms are located outside the McLaughlin Auditorium at the back door, and there are refreshments located in the foyer. Come to think that I think there's another set of washrooms down to the right. Just ask if you need help. So now, I'd like to introduce our first two speakers. Sivan Karen Young is Director of Digital and Visual Communication, and Jessica Lepore is a Digital Communication Specialist. Please welcome them to the podium to provide us with a primer on how social media platforms work, some pros and cons, and what you need to know about cyberbullying.
Thank you, Dr. Kreindler. So Jessica and I work here at Sunnybrook on the digital communications team, and we oversee the hospital's websites, the corporate sunnybrook.ca, the intranet, and lots of other digital channels. One of our roles roles here is social media monitoring and engagement. So we talk to the community about various health topics, and we do that virtually, so to speak. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the things that you're gonna hear about and learn about in our talk today. And so one of the things that we see in our day-to-day interaction in these spaces is, I would say, maybe some poor posting. So sometimes that'll look like people who are communicating with an enormous audience and not even realizing who they're speaking to, because it's become so innate to them to talk in such a public forum. Sometimes they do actually realize who they're talking to and don't care. So we see quite sort of the gamut, and we wanted to take this opportunity to share our learnings with you so that you can sort of step into our world and see what we see, and provide some context to some of the things that you may have been hearing about and may have wanted to ask questions about as well.
So we thought we would start the talk off by giving you guys just a quick primer on the social media channels that teens and tweens tend to be using. So the pie chart here is data taken from 2017, so it's very new, and it is from a survey of 6,000 teens in the US. What was found was that Snapchat tends to be the favorite platform of use, followed by Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. What's interesting to note is that if you looked at data from 2016 even, the favorite platforms would probably be a little bit different. So this is just something to keep in mind in terms of staying in communication with your teens and tweens to understand what is up and coming, what platforms they're using day to day.
So we know what they're using, but who is using it? And there's a very simple answer, which is all of them. Females are reporting sharing content on social media more often than males. Still, males certainly using it. Lots of teenagers, and teens ages 13 to 17 are going online, reporting 92%. So that's quite a high number. And as sort of mentioned earlier, that's not a world that a lot of people feel comfortable navigating, but it's something that is really just a second nature. I've heard it referred to as a generation that didn't grow up with social media as digital immigrants, and the generation that grows up with social media as digital natives, which I thought was a really interesting sort of analogy of who's comfortable in these spaces.
And so in order for you as a parent or a grandparent to become comfortable in these spaces, the best way to do so is by entering them. And we thought we would walk you through the steps on how to download these apps, and by doing so you can create an account, see how the interfaces work. You can kind of get an understanding of how your children are using them or grandchildren are using them to connect with one another, and as well play around with the privacy settings so you yourself can understand how much information can be out there, or how much you can protect it. So to download an app, a social media app, what you need to do is create an account with an app store that is compatible with your smartphone. So if it's an iPhone, this would be Apple App Stores, and if it is Android or Google phones, it would be the Google Play Store. Once you create an account, you can go into these stores and search for the app that you want to download, so Facebook or Twitter. And a lot of the social media platforms are free to download. The ones that your children or grandchildren are using probably are. So you can go ahead and download those from there. And once you have the application on your phone, you can create an account for yourself on each platform, and then go ahead and play around and kind of get a feel of how they work. Something to keep in mind is that you should be keeping your apps up to date. So So it's one thing to download them and play around on them and figure out how they work. But as the developers update these applications, they may add new features. For example, different features for messaging that your teams may be adopting, and you'll want to know about that. So keeping them up to date is a good idea.
Another thing that might change in an app revision could be the privacy settings, which is something you're going to want to be aware of. So it certainly happened quite a few times with Facebook, where people had the impression that they were sharing with a certain group of people, and then basically overnight that privacy setting changed. So the only way that you're going to be aware of what the changes are if you are operating in that space, and the only way to do that is to download the app and jump in. So we thought we'd go through just a few of the apps, specifically the ones that Jessica had shown you are the most popular. So Snapchat, the concept here is disappearing images and photos. And most teens and tweens think that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, it does create a bit of a sense of false security. So well, this picture is going to disappear anyway, so who cares what it's of or who I'm sending it to? Not a great idea, because actually any picture can be taken with another photo with another phone, can be recorded. There's no such thing as disappearing. It's not a real thing. So that's certainly something to be aware of if you're ever in a discussion with a teen about, you know, where that photo goes. It leaves a digital footprint, which is something we're going to talk some more about. There's also a lot of pressure within Snapchat to post often. So this can lead to some anxiety, which I'm sure we'll get to, just about the appearance that you're creating in this space. So not just putting your best photo on, but making sure you're doing that every day and getting lots of views.
So Instagram is also a very visual platform where teens and tweens can share photos and videos of themselves. By default, these accounts are public, so when your teen or tween creates their account, anyone can view their images. So it is important to know that you need to manually go into the settings to make it private. That's just something to keep in mind. Another thing with Instagram is that location can be added to images that are shared. So if I were to share a photo from Sunnybrook today, for example, I would have the option to tag it as being taken here. And what that does is not only show everyone where my photo was taken, but people can also click on the location tag and view all of the public images that were taken in that space. As well, you can add hashtags to your posts on Instagram. So what this is a pound sign added in front of a word. So for example, hashtag Sunnybrook. And this makes the term searchable and basically puts all the images that have that tag into a feed or gallery. And this is something just to keep in mind as well. So if your teen has a public account and they are using locations or adding hashtags to their posts, it just means that it can reach more people. The way to avoid that would, of course, be a private account. This is just something to keep in mind.
So another thought about location is your teen is then telling everyone where they are. And if the account is public and they've told everybody where they are, it's also telling people weeks, months, years from now where they've been. So that's, again, a digital footprint that people are leaving behind that often people aren't thinking about. They're just, hey, I'm here. I'm going to let people know that I'm here. I'm going to press this, and this shows people that I was at Sunnybrook. Well, if you're applying for a job, that might not be the best thing if your posts are inappropriate, which a lot of posts are. So it's just another way of being searchable that a lot of folks don't think about. So Twitter, which is super popular and very multi-generational, is a site where you can share 140 to 280 characters. People are posting photos, videos, and live streaming as well. An important thing to note about Twitter is accounts are public by default. So if you're creating a Twitter account and you don't want your tweets to be seen by the entire world, then you need to go immediately into your privacy settings and make it very clear that people can only follow you with your permission. Again, in the world of privacy and in the world of digital footprint, just because your account is private doesn't mean that somebody is not going to take a screenshot and post it around the world. So this is a platform that's based on conversations, very public conversations. Even if you're just sort of scrolling through because you're interested in the tweets of other people, again, anything that you retweet, that you post, even on a private account, it's really important to be aware of how quickly that can be made public.
And the final app or platform that we're going to be chatting about is Facebook. Some of you may be familiar with the platform. It's a little bit different than the platforms that we talked about earlier because the content that your child or teen would be engaging with is usually coming from friends that they've already approved or accepted to be in a part of their profile, or brands that they have decided to follow. On Facebook, like the other platforms, you can live stream video, you can share images, and also chat with friends, so live chat, group chat as well. Something to keep in mind is that the privacy settings on Facebook are a little bit different than the other platforms. The other platforms is more of you can select private and it's private. With Facebook, your profile has different privacy settings. So I can have a private profile, but then the posts that I share, the privacy settings can differ for those as well. And the information on your profile, these settings are also differ. So the amount of information on your profile that you share with others publicly or privately, they're all a little bit different. So that's something that we do suggest you talk to your child about and go through these with them in detail, just to ensure that all of the private information that they have on there, it does stay private.
And Facebook is a perfect example of privacy settings sort of changing, as I mentioned earlier. So if any of you are on Facebook, you may know that it used to be that your profile picture and your cover photo were private by default. And so you would change it every once in a while, or you would maybe see a change on others' posts. Those are now public, and they can't be private. So if you have a Facebook account and you have a profile picture, I can guarantee you that somebody can see it out there in the world that you probably don't realize is seeing it. Same thing for your cover photo. So there is this space where people are creating, sort of curating their personal profile and thinking, well, I only have 30 Facebook friends, and that's fine. Nobody else out there in the world sees me. Do a Google search for yourself, and it may be the only thing that comes up, your cover photo on Facebook. So your homework for this part of our talk is to talk to your kids. As Jessica noted, download the apps that they're using and make sure that you look at and understand the privacy settings.
So we thought we'd go over a little bit about cyberbullying, and to start it off, we would talk a bit about the policies that the Toronto District School Board has. So the Toronto District School Board does cover cyberbullying in their bullying prevention and intervention policy. And this policy encompasses any bullying or cyberbullying that happens on school property, as school-related activities, on school buses, or other circumstances where engaging in bullying will have a negative impact on the school environment. So what we do suggest is sitting down and talking to the school administration to get a better understanding of how they are implementing these policies. So the policies there, but maybe how in past situations have they been handled, just for you as a parent or grandparent to get a good understanding of what policies or procedures you'd want to follow in the case that this was happening to your child. There is no specific social media policy for students through the Toronto District School Board, but they do have an online policy which just talks a bit about what students can download or say when using the Wi-Fi network at the school or using their computers that are plugged into their network. And there's a bit more information about that on a page that we will link to at the end of our talk, as well as a link to the bullying prevention and intervention policy.
So another important topic that we thought we'd touch on is what the child pornography sort of laws in Canada are specifically. And because there's a bit of a nuance, so making, distributing, possession, or accessing child pornography is illegal. Everyone who knowingly publishes, distributes, transmits, sells, makes available, or advertises an intimate image of a person, knowing that the person depicted in the image did not give their consent to that conduct, or being reckless as to whether or not that person gave their consent to that conduct, is guilty and could face up to 5 years in prison if found guilty. So what's interesting is that there was a 2001 ruling by the Supreme Court, and it established what's known as the intimate photo exception. This allows two youths who engage in lawful sexual activity to consensually record their own lawful sexual activity, as long as that recording is made or possessed for their own personal use. So this material remains child pornography, but the youth can lawfully possess it for their personal use. If that relationship goes sour, the image is then distributed, it's child pornography, and that person is in possession of child pornography.
So we've touched a bit about cyberbullying, and a statistic here that's kind of interesting and kind of awful is that 16% of US high school students had reported being bullied electronically in the past year, and this was in 2015. I'm sure that this statistic has probably even gone up in the past 2 years since. So and we've talked a bit about it, but what exactly is cyberbullying and what does it look like? So this video here kind of gives a glimpse into that. We did want to warn that there is some profane language in this video, and some of the instances in the video can be a bit disturbing or upsetting, as it is a pretty disturbing and upsetting topic, cyberbullying. So if you do feel that that might make you uncomfortable, now might be a good time to kind of stretch your legs. So give
Okay, so what does cyberbullying look like? So teens could create accounts that are aimed at shaming or targeting other students, posting purposefully unflattering images of other teens, posting screenshots, so pictures of what was communicated on a phone or on a computer, private messages, catfishing teens to get information from them, so pretending to be someone else, getting information that's personal and private, and then sharing it with other people. Subtweeting, which is a passive-aggressive writing, something on social media targeting someone who's unnamed, but it's very clear to the people who are reading it who's being discussed.
So some of the ways that people cyberbully are a little bit different in terms of traditional bullying because they've stemmed from these online platforms, but there's also a lot of ways that cyberbullying mirrors traditional face-to-face bullying, just using different mediums. So, for example, exclusion. So, excluding your child or teen from a group chat that all of their friends or peers at school are having, or posting images of a group of friends on social media at an event that your child wasn't invited to. So, using these mediums as a way to let them know that they're not a part of the group or the status quo. So posting mean comments. So this could be mean comments on your child's social media content, their friends' social media content, or through one-on-one direct messaging through these platforms. Using threatening language or encouraging self-harm as well.
So this is sort of brings us back to this digital footprint concept that I had mentioned earlier. So for me personally, the biggest takeaway in engaging in social media is the assumption that once it's out there, it is there forever. Forever. So even disappearing images, private messages, posts, anything can be reposted. And this goes for text message conversations that aren't on social media, that are just between family members or friends or whatever. Anything on a phone can be shared. So a good question to ask yourself and a good question to ask your teens as they're sort of navigating this world is when you are posting something, is it something you're comfortable having the entire world see?
So that brings us to two real-life examples where the consequences of social media are very evident in people's real lives. So the first example is actually from June 2017, so very recent. Students were recently accepted to Harvard and joined a Facebook group. And from that Facebook group, they created a private chat. And in this private chat, they started sharing images with one another that were racist, blatantly. And the school administration got wind of that and ended up revoking the acceptances of these 10 students. This group chat was not public, it was private. These 10 students were the only ones in it, but word still got around, and it did have real life consequences in terms of their academic futures. Our second example here is from 2013. Justine Sacco, she was a PR professional with 170 Twitter followers. So that is not a huge following. Celebrities have millions of followers. 170 is very modest. But through her public account had tweeted the message here. And she was on a plane for 11 hours. Within that 11 hours, as she was going to Africa, this tweet blew up on social media. It was worldwide. People were writing angrily about it. It was covered in the news. So the headline here is from the New York Times.
And this is all happening while she's still on the airplane. She has not landed and is not aware of the fact that she is now famous for this one message.
There was actually a trending topic on Twitter that was, has Justine landed yet? People were waiting for her to get off the plane and see how quickly this had spread. The consequences were she ended up losing her job as a PR professional. She was also publicly ridiculed worldwide. So it's just a really obvious example of how public, how global social media is, how fast acting, and how your digital life, your online presence, and your real life are not two separate things. They are one and the same, and the choices that you make on an online platform can affect your real life in very consequential ways.
So your homework for this part of our chat is to talk to kids specifically about what they're sharing. So are they sharing intimate images? Is any of the content or comments that they're making offensive? And again, whether they're in a private group does not matter. And as Jessica pointed out, there are very real consequences, and they are very fast.
So we've talked about all of the ways that social media is public and all of the ways that things can go wrong on social media with bullying or posting messages that could have consequences on your everyday life. So you might be wondering, how can I control what my teen does on social media?
You cannot. So there's something that I only learned about fairly recently, which is called Finstagram. So let's say you followed all of our direction, you've gone home, you've downloaded the app, your kids are even adding you on social media, and you can see what they're posting. Well, kids are a lot smarter than we often give them credit for. They have fake Instagram accounts called Finstagram. They're posting what you can see, while they have real Instagram accounts, which are curated for their friends, and they are leading double lives on social media platforms where they're carefully curating for different audiences. It's actually quite an impressive skill. So again, controlling it is not something that we recommend even trying to do. It's more about having an open dialogue with them. There are also really great ways to use smartphones as you engage with your kids. My cousin has a Find My Kids GPS tracker. It sends her notifications when her kids have arrived to school, so she doesn't even need to sort of sit by the phone and wait until they call her. And she sort of feels more comfortable having them go off to friends' houses because she can literally see exactly where they are. They can contact her very easily because of that. So there are lots of classes. Just find them.
And that is it for talk today. We did have there's a link on sunnybrook.ca, sunnybrook.ca/social media. Here you can find some resources that we touched upon. So the Toronto District School Board information, but as well some privacy information for parents for all of the platforms that we touched on as well, and some cyberbullying resources.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sivan and Jessica. Nice job. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions, you're live. If you have any questions, please write it down on the white card and hold up your hand. One of our volunteers will collect it between speakers. I would now like to introduce tonight's next speaker, Dr. Carolyn Bolus, a colleague of mine in the Division of Youth Psychiatry. Dr. Bolus is a staff psychiatrist whose practice focuses on youth psychiatry. She joins us tonight to talk about mood disorders stemming from social media use. Don't sit down. You're due up here. So please welcome Dr. Bolus to the podium.
I'm going to see if I can manage this, and I'm going to ask if you can't hear me in the back anytime through the talk, put your hand up, okay? Now I'm going to have to figure out how this works. Oops, I just go to the mouse to here. And I just don't want to fall off this thing. Hopefully I won't do that. So I'm going to talk actually a little bit more towards the possible mental health issues that may result or possibly be connected to social media use with adolescents. And I would gather this probably would refer to younger children as well, and I also see people that are in their early 20s, so into high school, university, college. As we have already know, we've heard about Instagram, we've heard about Snapchat, and I know within my clinic I see a lot of young people. Facebook used to be a lot of what they used, and now they're using a lot more Snapchat and Instagram, so they're actually speaking fewer words as they're communicating. Certainly, it shows that this is a change in the way that we do communicate, even though I still will go back and say the most important communication is still what happens between two people when they see each other and they talk. So the effect on mental health from the research that I was reading is somewhat controversial, but I think what we do know is that social media doesn't necessarily cause a mental health disorder, but it certainly has an impact on it. And that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. UK Public Health Study survey of about 1,500 youths showed similar to the percentages we saw tonight, at least 90% or more of youth are using social media for communication. And one of my adult children said to me, mention Selena Gomez. She was one of the most followed people on Instagram and apparently had to go to take a break from her social media because it was just too overwhelming for her. I put this up, it's probably a little bit old, but it says, my ancestors were hunters and gatherers, but I'm more of a surfer and an orderer. Just to say that all of you guys are probably on social media as well, even though a lot of the younger kids don't necessarily realize that. I'm going to talk a little bit about negative impact, but I'm also going to balance it with talking about positive impact. Again, there's not a whole lot of research out there, so I'm just kind of collecting what I've read and also what I see clinically. So negative feelings could arouse from using social media and a general dissatisfaction with life. There can be distraction from real life and the illusion of being connected socially. So if you get a lot of friends, you have this feeling that you've got a lot of friends, but in actual fact, it's not the same as the kind of intimate interaction that would happen with a real friend that you see in real life. School avoidance and academic decline can happen if somebody's spending a lot of time on social media or has been subjected to cyberbullying or has felt very much like they've been left out of a lot of things because they see other people going to events and posting and they're not going. Academic decline in terms of not getting their homework done or staying up late at night, so when they go to school the next day they're very tired and it's hard for them to focus and concentrate as well. We've heard a little bit tonight about cyberbullying, also sexting, which is when they talked about the intimate pictures and sexual behavior that can happen between adolescents using social media. And also we've talked about the importance of disclosing too much information. And again, when you're kind of interacting with your computer and not necessarily having that real live person there, it's kind of easy to say more than you really perhaps would have said in a real life situation. I think it also affects the ability to understand some of the intimate aspects of face-to-face conversation. So, you know, the handshake, what happens when you see somebody both in terms of verbal and nonverbal communication. And then the unrealistic expectations of oneself when comparing too often to these photoshopped images. And it's amazing how much you can change your image. Or as my daughter says, change the lighting, the image, it can be a different person. And that can then affect the young people, particularly women, as to how they're supposed to look or what their body shape or type is supposed to be. Now, there's also the positive impact. So I had the delight today, while I took a little break in my clinic, to see some beautiful photos of a place just outside of Paris, because my daughter happens to be over there, and she was visiting, and I was able to hear kind of blow by blow, if I can put it that way, a little bit about what was happening with her. So the connection with family and friends can certainly positively affect mental well-being, or even connecting with some of your young adults that are away at college or university, and they can text you or talk to you indirectly via social media without necessarily phoning you, and kind of knowing that you're there on the other side. So there's positives and negatives. But that connection with family, no matter where they are, we're now sort of globally moving around so much, it's nice to be able to say, this is what I saw today, and share it with your aunt or your cousin or your close friend or a parent or whoever. It also is a less intimidating form of social communication for people that may have social anxiety. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about social anxiety and depression. But it gives them a feeling like they can still do some communication, even though they're very uncomfortable if they're in face-to-face situations with people. It also is a connection, regardless of any physical disabilities, or if somebody is sick for a period of time, they can still keep in contact with their friends and family. This was just a short slide to talk a little bit about depressive symptoms. So in our young people, they may present with depression being very, very irritable, very difficult to get along with. They may be sad, or they may not be sad. They may simply say, I'm bored, I don't want to do anything, I have no motivation to do anything. And they may drop out of a lot of activities that they do. They may withdraw. They may be the kids that take off and you don't see them because their bedroom door is closed. And they can end up spending more time on social media, but maybe interact with it in a different way when they're very anxious or not anxious, or when they're depressed or they're not depressed. It's also possible that the social media may become a very large distraction, and distractions can be very addictive, as we know. We can think of Netflix, we can think of, in the older times, television as a distraction from uncomfortable feelings, whether it's depression or anxiety or the stressors of everyday life. So this one is an old little comic, Go to Bed. And how many or how often can you remember telling that to your young teens, or your own parents telling it to you when you were young? So when we talk about depression, again, I try to kind of relate this to the literature that I was reading, and also to think about what I see in the clinic. It's important, I find now, to ask about social media. And I remember when the internet came out and Facebook, and I remember it was probably over 10 years ago, I was starting to sort of talk to adolescents about how they were communicating, and realizing I was going to miss a whole lot of that clinical interview if I wasn't going to talk about this area. Now it's a regular thing whenever I do a consultation or on a day-to-day basis. What sites are they going? How do they relate? What do they like to relate? Are they relating? Are they not relating? If I have a very depressed teen, they may actually be using less and less social media because they're withdrawing more. They may be looking at the posts of other kids, but they're posting less. So I'm just asking questions, and I think we had a very good talk here tonight to know how the different types of social media do work, so you can there extrapolate from that how they may change how they use that depending on how their mood or anxiety is. Studies have found that increased use of Facebook may lead to a decline in subjective well-being or happiness in youth. Again, if they're comparing themselves to what they're seeing, if they're looking at what some of their friends or peers are doing, and they're realizing they're not involved or they're not part of all of this. And I know that people can create their own image of what their life is like, when in actual fact it may not be as stimulating and as exciting as they're making it appear to be in social media. But that's not necessarily how that person who's viewing their posts will be interpreting it. Studies have found that there's more time that the youth may spend on social media, the more likely they may be depressed. Now again, which came first? And I don't want you to walk away with the idea that social media necessarily causes depression. It just may change, depression may change how they use it. Social media, as I already said, may be a distraction, but it can further fuel the depression if they're already feeling bad about themselves and feeling very negative, and then how they negatively will interpret how well other people are doing in comparison to their own life. So it kind of gives us a distorted view of what's really going on. There's really no conclusive evidence, at least to this point, that it causes depression. And in actual fact, when I find kids using less social media, they may actually be getting less depressed because now they're going out and they're meeting with their friends. I'm going to talk a little bit about anxiety symptoms, and I'm not, again, talking about all the anxiety disorders, but just to talk a little bit about what some of these young people can feel, or even any of us, when we're anxious. So they can be the shy children that in their adolescence may develop social anxiety. They may be kids that are very sensitive to comments. And at times you can almost pick up, if you're in a classroom, for example, the kids that may be more likely to be bullied or teased. They tend to look as though it bothers them more, and it kind of gives them it almost gives them the bully the opportunity to say, well, I can really get at this kid. And really dealing with bullying, when you look at it, we told kids years ago, stand up to the bully, or, don't go and try and deal with it yourself. If it's become too difficult, let an adult know. And those same principles apply to cyberbullying as well. So anxiety may be a fear of being judged by other people, or that I might do something embarrassing in front of other people. A lot of kids with anxiety have difficulty with presentation. So they wouldn't be able to get up and talk like this. This would cause a lot of difficulty for them. And they may not want to participate in class because they're afraid of being pointed out. People who have anxiety, or adolescents that have anxiety, may be worried and tense and irritable, and they may have a very difficult time getting down to sleep at night because they're so worried. And then you can kind of think, if they get on the social media, or they get on to see what other people are posting, and they compare it to the way that their lives are going. You can also have kids having panic attacks, and we know some of those symptoms can be shortness of breath, racing heart, dizziness, upset stomach. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about social anxiety, but it can probably encompass a lot of the different anxiety disorders, and in context of social media. So we've got this nice little penguin here. It says, go to social events, do nothing socially awkward, and despite going, still overanalyze and worry about everything afterwards. So youth who are socially anxious may use Facebook or other forms of social media because it may be easier for them to communicate via social media than to communicate face-to-face. So in the beginning, I thought this is a very good way of some of my socially anxious kids who never had this medium before, that this may help. But then once they've started to communicate, what happens if they don't take that into real life? So it may make it difficult to make that leap, and it's important to kind of talk about those things. Social media may strengthen and maintain social ties with family and close friends, but again, like anything else, in moderation, just like we talk with our diet, in moderation. Overuse can weaken some of these ties, and in turn may actually lead to loneliness. So there's too much of a reliance on social media for their social interaction, and there's far less of this real interaction, and that can lead to loneliness. So the anxiety can be triggered by this FOMO, which is a fear of missing out, when they see pictures of events or outings that they may not have been invited to.
provide expert navigation of the mental health and addiction system for youth living in the GTA. Please give Michael a warm welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Kreindler. So as mentioned, I work for the Family Navigation Project, a program with Sunnybrook Hospital. We heard today a lot about social media and how it can really happen concurrently at the same time with a lot of different things. So I won't be speaking specifically about social media, but when it's happening concurrently with mental illnesses, addiction, low self-esteem, those types of things, then I was invited here today to talk about the Family Navigation Project to be a program to help. So I'll be talking a bit about our program, the history, how we came about, to kind of give you an idea, our viewpoint. And then I also wanted to share a family story to give you an idea of the case examples of families that we regularly deal with and how social media impacts the youth in those families. So our history, we're started by parents with lived experience who came across huge hurdles within the mental health and addiction systems to try to get care for their loved ones. And because of this hardship and just the difficulty navigating the system, they approached psychiatric leadership at Sunnybrook in order to develop a program that would provide personalized support to match youth and families with a best fit, a professionals program that would actually be the most appropriate for their youth and families, so that they didn't have to spend time idling within the system and wasting valuable time and wasting it. So our service launched in 2013. So as of this month, I believe of this week, we've existed for 4 years. And the backbone of our program is parents with lived experience. It was started by them, and they've been involved with all the aspects of our program, from the design to the implementation. And our kind of board of directors, our family advisory council, are all families, parents with this lived experience of having a youth that's been afflicted with mental health and substance use issues. So they still provide ongoing guidance and program. And since our launch in 2013, also part of our team is someone that we call our PAL, a parent advocate with lived experience. This is a person that's been navigated by our program. So it's her role to be paired with families and actually provide emotional support and guidance for families that are part of our navigation process. So to give you kind of a rundown of our process, to be eligible for our program, parents, caregivers, youth aged 13 to 26 living within the GTA, so that's Durham, York, Peel, Toronto, any youth that has a mental health, mental illness, substance use issue, addiction, they contact the Family Navigation. We provide all of our contact over phone and email, and everything is self-referral. You don't need a doctor's referral. First step is to give us a call. You're triaged by our intake professional, just to make sure that you kind of live within our area, that we would be able to actually help you in a certain way. And from there, you're assigned to a navigator like myself. And in our intake assessment, we use the analogy that we get in the boat with families. And what this means is, in our intake assessment, we try to get as much information from families to get the best understanding of what's been going on, to get an idea from you and understand what's your family been inflicted with. And with all this information, we get the best idea of what would be the most appropriate fit for services within our system. So we take that information and we believe that more heads are better than one. So we act as a team. So along with myself, we have 8 other navigators. So we have a consultation process. And along with navigators, we also consult with one of the 2 psychiatrists. One is Dr. Levitt with Sunnybrook, another is Dr. Ravi with Sick Kids Hospital. And in addition with navigators and psychiatrists, we also consult with our PAL, our parent advocate with lived experience. She remains part of that process. So through our consultation and the information that's been provided, it gets determined. So a list of suggestions to provide families about what some services may be appropriate, some things that we can start off with. The next step would be resource finding. A big part of our role at Family Navigation is to keep our finger on the pulse of the mental health and addiction system, because it's ever changing. So we regularly meet with other professionals. We regularly meet with other programs. We go to them, they come to us. We try to keep that relationship as constant as possible, so that we know what are new programs are happening, because everyone has certain nuances, certain things that people do better with, to get an understanding, put a face to a name, to get a better understanding of what type of client a certain professional service would do best with. So that way we can go back. The next step, exploring options with family and youth, is being able to present this to the family and really walk through their options and kind of decide what makes the most sense, and to go through those steps with them. So once a family and youth are involved with services, we work collaboratively, obviously with their permission, with these public and private services, so that we can make sure that everyone's on the same page. We regularly stay involved. We get the consent signs, get permissions for families and youths to make sure that things are working. And then we regularly follow up to make sure that this best fit service is really the best fit service. And then so that's part of our follow up. So what type of families contact us? And we get an array of people. Firstly, people don't understand the mental illnesses and addiction themselves, and they don't understand the system. It's very complex. It's very common. So they just really don't know what the first step is, or they're just looking for more information. Like they're seeing some things in their youth, and they don't know if they should be concerned. They're looking for more information. Next step is they know their child, their youth, their teen, young adult needs help, but they can't figure out how to get into the system. They don't know what that first call is. They don't know what that first step is. So we sometimes are that first step and can kind of direct that path. A bulk of the people that we do encounter on a daily basis are already in the system. And because of the system in different ways, they're kind of lost. So firstly, they can't figure out how to advocate for the loved one. So they may have been involved with some sort of service, but they're kind of stuck. Another one is they know how to advocate, but they're not getting the help that they need. A lot of service providers have certain language and lingo that's really, really difficult to kind of wrap your head around. So because we're the whole family navigation team has experience within that system, sometimes we're able to better filter out. And some families may be waiting in the wrong queue line, not understanding the eligibility criteria and really understanding what that next step may be. They may already be getting help, but there's multiple people involved, and things aren't coordinated. Sometimes people work in silos, and it's no fault of any service provider. Sometimes they're not just getting all the information. So part of our role is actually kind of breaking down any of these walls to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Help is available. There's many different mental health and substance use services out there, but their youth isn't willing to attend, or they may have originally attended, but they're not willing to follow up. So being able to work, we work from a family systems model, so we try to support the entire family. So even if one person's not willing to get help, we try to work in supporting the rest of the family. Or if the youth is willing, but certain local resources have been exhausted. And if certain resources are being exhausted, we'll look at other options. Sometimes this may be looking at private resources, sometimes it's internationally, sometimes it's advocating for already publicly and local resources that have been accessed and just accessing them in a different way. And the smallest population that we deal with, but still have experience with, is families that have exhausted local and international resources. So sometimes this is going back and re-looking at things that have already been accessed. So over 4 years, as I mentioned, November 2013, what have we achieved? We've navigated for over 2,000 families. And in each of these navigations, more than one person was involved. So this is working with close to 4,000 different individuals. The median age of the youth is about 19 years old, so the transitional population. About half is mental illness only, so anxiety, depression, bipolar, things like that. And then almost half is concurrent, meaning that the youth presenting had both mental illness and difficulties with substance use. Almost 2/3 or 3/4 of the people that contact us are parent and caregivers initiating service. So most of the people that the first call is with mom or dad for the most part, and then about 17%, the youth was the first one to make that call. This is not to say that it's the only person that we talk to. In many situations, we'll talk to mom, dad, and then we'll talk to their child as well. But that's the person who's first reaching out. Something that we're really proud of is over these 4 years, we've maintained a very quick response time. When someone first calls us, you'll be contacted again within 24 hours. And then from 48 hours from that, you'll be connected to a navigator who will reach out and actually have that initial call and gathering that information. So, and over 4 years, we've maintained that. And within these 4 years, about 95% of the families have all been local resources. So it's been something close to their home. And 75% of those resources are publicly funded, meaning that it was no cost to the family. Okay, so I also wanted to share a family story to kind of give you an idea of clients that we get, how mental health, substance use, and social media has affected them in such a way. So a mom contacted us regarding her 16-year-old son, who expressed concern about marijuana use, social isolation, and low mood. The benefit of this situation is that after our initial phone call with mom, her son was also willing to speak to us. So some of the information off the initial call was actually provided by the youth themselves. And just as a disclosure, I've changed some information just to protect privacy. So changed some ages and some details. During our initial intake, we discovered that 2 years prior, so when our son was 14 years old, he had previous issues with marijuana use, but mom thought it was resolved. And after speaking to the youth, we realized that in grade 9, he actually was introduced to marijuana use, and he was using it. He was quite adamant that he was using it to help his own social anxiety when interacting with peers. And his actual feeling of loneliness, a transition going into high school. And most of his use in grade 9 was using by himself, which mom didn't approve, obviously, at the time. However, mom just didn't know how to deal with it. And it really got to the point where mom was about to reach out for help, but then she saw the marijuana use go down to such a degree where it was non-existent. They didn't really notice any intoxication, didn't notice any smell, so they thought everything was good. However, the parents found that their son's new obsession was all around his phone. He remained isolated at times, but overall happier. So the parents were really conflicted. Like, okay, well, he's not using marijuana anymore, and he seems happier, but we still don't see him all the time, so I'm not exactly sure what to do. And they would see certain behavior, like, you know, he'd be in the living room and he'd be posting something, and then just sit there and refresh the page over and over again, just wanting to see how many likes, how many comments he got. It was like an instant gratification, just wanting to see what would happen. He would regularly be awake up all night, so his sleep deteriorated. And then they saw a significant decrease in his schoolwork. They got some calls from the teacher saying that marks were declining, stopped doing some homework. He wasn't handing all of his assignments in, and this was a huge change from prior because he was actually an A+ student. Instead, he was getting C's and D's. So most of his time was being spent on his phone rather than towards schoolwork. Other things that mom was seeing was with this isolation, at least he would come down for dinner. This stopped as well. So, and it got to the point where parents were like, okay, we need to start monitoring his cell phone use. So they tried to take it away from him. Unfortunately, when they tried to take it away from him, it caused some extreme anger where he was actually very aggressive and violent at times. So with my conversations with the youth, kind of asked him a little bit more, like what does the social media provide to him? And it provided him a network, a community of friends. He didn't have to deal with the social anxiety anymore. It was a network of belongingness, which is a huge factor with social media. Because if you're having that social anxiety, it's difficult to face people every day. You're still able to interact with people without having that anxious thoughts. And the bulk of the social media usage was around playing a game. So he really liked playing one certain online game, but he also was connected with these friends on different social media platforms. So it got to the point where not only were they planning on when they were playing, but also they were talking about novel conversations. So to him, they were really the best of friends. He got to a certain comfort level where he began to describe thoughts of self-harm that he was having. There's some really dark thoughts that he's been dealing with a long time, and his relationship with these peers over the internet got to the point where he wanted to share them. Unfortunately, the response that he got was, "We can't help you, you need to get help." Which, for a youth that doesn't know how to deal with these thoughts, may have been appropriate, but this was rejection to him. And it wasn't the response that he was looking for. So he kept kind of probing, wanting to look for more help. And it got to the point with these other youth that they blocked him. So he didn't know when people were playing online. He wasn't able to participate in any of these conversations. So he had an intense feeling of being ostracized and being abandoned by his peer social media network. So because of this, he started using marijuana again to cope with these feelings. And mom was able to report that around this time she was recognizing intense feelings of paranoia, where her son felt that the world was evil and the world was against him. This was about the time when we became involved. Her mom realized, okay, I need some help. She ended up hearing our name from her family doctor, so she gave us a call. So once we were able to get in the boat with the family and understand what's been going on over the last couple of years, collaborated with the team, and we decided that the first step was for a psychiatric assessment. One, to rule out psychosis, which it was, because we were worried about the paranoia, but also to get psychiatric feedback in terms of pharmaceutical approaches, but also therapeutic approaches. So medication was provided, and which was able to lessen some of the symptoms of depression and anxiety. And unfortunately, during this, the youth was really, really willing to seek help because he recognized that he wasn't well. He recognized that he didn't want to feel like this anymore, and he wanted to reach out. So the medication was able to lessen the intensity of some of these symptoms. But then there was also recommendations for cognitive behavioral therapy, which would help some of these irrational thoughts in regards to feeling anxious, and then also dialectical behavioral therapy, which can help with self-harm feelings. So what my team was able to do was find local resources to help with finding these modes of treatment. And one of the suggestions from the therapist was kind of some exposure type therapy, so to kind of get them more engaged in the face-to-face. So we were able to help them actually get hooked up with a peer group for other youth with anxiety, with social anxiety. So he was actually able to really feel understood with this new peer group. He felt heard, he felt understood, and he was actually able to share some of these dark, more negative feelings that he felt bottled up for many years. And at the same time, we were also able to work with the family. So firstly, we were able to offer our PAL, our parent advocate with lived experience, for emotional support and guidance. And in addition to that, we were also able to look into some psychoeducational resources for the family so that they could learn more about mental health, learn more about addiction, learn more about social media and how everything interacts. In addition to this, we also were able to coordinate a parent coach. A parent coach can kind of help families look at different strategies, look at setting boundaries and limits, and especially with as this youth is kind of recovering and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. They were able to kind of help set the social media, help set kind of healthy living guidelines with the help of a parent coach. So as a result, and as of a recent update, the mom was able to tell us that she feels that her family, for the first time in a couple of years, is on a positive course. He's eating at the dinner table again. They're seeing an increase of marks. An overall increased quality of life. So he's still moody sometimes. However, things are still, family still feels like they're on a good course. So in terms of my presentation, appreciate being here and hope you enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you so much, Michael. That concludes the formal presentations for this evening. I'd like to now ask our speakers to make their way up to the front to begin the question and answer session. If there are any more questions, if there are questions, please feel free to write them down on the white cards. They'll be brought up to the front by our volunteers, and they will be asked or be answered by our panel. So let's start with an easy one. What is a retweet?
It's
You're going to need to speak right into the microphone. Thank you.
it's like sorry. It's like a reply all. So you are sharing whatever message you see. You are sharing it with all of your followers.
A second relatively straightforward one. Can you talk about how one goes about checking your child's history of usage?
So in terms of checking your child's usage, if they have applications downloaded on their phone, what we would maybe suggest is having an open dialogue with your child about what apps are you using, like how do they work, going through them that way. On their phone specifically, it's not exactly like internet history where on a browser you can go through and see exactly what websites they've been visiting. On their phones, what apps they're downloading and using, you can't specifically see it that way. in terms of maybe asking for access to their, so when we had previously talked about how you download apps, you need an account for an app store. One way that you could maybe communicate with your child would be asking them to download their apps from the app store through your email address, so you could be able to see what applications they're downloading that way. Would probably be the most integrated way. But
I also maybe want to ask Dr. Lewis if you should be looking at your child's social media records.
I think that there still is a certain amount of privacy that any of our children do appreciate that we give them. And it goes back again to having trust and respect that you have within your family. But again, talking to adolescents about what they're doing, talking to your kids about what you're doing, that has to be an ongoing dialogue. But obviously, I don't know everything that happens with my adolescents or even some of the kids in the office. But they at least, if they know that they can trust you, that you're not going to try and judge them, you're going to listen. I think that opens up the possibility that they're going to tell you more than if you always make a comment or judge them right away when they say what they're doing.
There's a question here about why are some kids targeted for cyberbullying? What is it about them?
Why are some kids targeted? I think that's an age-old question. When my kids were younger, I spent time in the classroom with them on certain days, and I could always predict, not too badly, which kids were going to be targeted. They were often the kids that were a little more shy. They didn't sort of join in as much. They kind of observed things. Their self-esteem tended to be a little bit lower. So I'm sure you can also think about kids that you've grown up with and why certain kids would be more likely to be teased than others. Some of them might have been the crybabies in the class or whatever. It's the same when I was growing up as it is now. I don't believe that it's actually changed.
It gets complicated because it is a part of teenage life to be nicer to your friends than to the people who you're not friends with. But if, as you're saying, somebody reacts badly to it and there happens to be somebody who has kind of a bullying frame of mind about it, that just provides grist for the mill. A follow-up question: how do I deal with the offender teen in the case that my child is being cyberbullied? Will it make it worse for my teen if I confront them?
I guess for
Start the family navigation projects to Michael in a bit.
I'm not entirely sure what's being asked. What do you think is being asked by that?
What happens if I squeal?
What happens if I squeal? That's an age-old question about when do you squeal and when do you not squeal. When you know that your adolescent is, again, if you sit down and you say to them, what do you want to do about this? This is what's happening. How much is it affecting you? If you're really seeing that the child is totally overwhelmed, of course you've got to go into the school or you've got to go to the police or whatever's going on. But first you have to check in with your child. Figure out what's happening. How is it affecting them? Do you want to add to that?
Nope. I do wonder though whether or not we feel like there's any difference about either the process of squealing in the age of cyber whatever. Is it any different online as opposed to in person?
I think I'm going to ask somebody from the TDSB about that. Do you think it's any different? Yes.
This has always been difficult, and as Dr. Kindler said, it's like age-old, are we going to make things worse if we're going to go and complain about it? If there's going to be some retaliation, and there's a twofold answer I'm going to give. The first answer is have a good relationship with your child or grandchild so that you can talk about it And remember, most teenagers, and I deal with a few on a regular basis, are afraid to quote unquote make things worse. And the first reaction they're going to have is, don't tell anything to anybody. You're going to make things worse. I'm going to have my face beaten in or anything along those lines.
And just to say, this is a vice principal that's speaking, so he gets this all the time. And he's with the TDSB.
So you ideally should be able to discuss that and lower the tension. In my experience, and as has been said, I do deal with this on a regular basis. Try to be not judgmental. Don't jump into, well, I know the answer. Of course it's going to happen. You may be right. You may also be totally wrong. But what's important is not to believe an answer to the young person, is to have them work through it. That does take time, and it does take a discussion that you may feel you don't have the patience to because you already know the answer, but you still have to do it. That also establishes the communication. The second part of the answer is to involve somebody at the school, either a guidance counselor or an administrator, and to try to have some sensitivity to people to deal with it. In my experience, when this is brought forward in a nice way and there is communication done with the other side, quite often it's not always one side that's going to be at fault. We always get a different story, number one. And number two, when a situation is dealt with in a nice way, you can tell the other side to basically cease and desist in a nice way, give a gentle warning. You can have warnings given to the other students. You can have the police involved as a non-punitive, non-threatening discussion that simply says, you know, this is the kind of thing that can happen. And you can also do, depending on the school, dressing circles or discussions, involve a social worker, and try to help both sides grow. Because as Dr. Kleiner said, this is unfortunately a part of adolescence. There's always going to be some kids who drive all kinds of reasons, usually because they themselves are insecure. They try to put other kids down because it makes them feel better. So the key is communication, open dialogue, and gentle holding on and teaching. And most times it does work, although it is not easy. And I want to go back to what Dr. Bola said. You do not tell them. You direct them gently, but you don't tell them. And one of the most difficult things to do for parents, and I see this every day, is you may know an awful lot, but you're only dad, or you're only grandpa. Sometimes bring in somebody else. They have more credibility than you do, even if you know more than they do. That makes sense.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions about handling misuse. One question is essentially what are the implications of taking a cell phone away from a teen as punishment? There's a second question here, which is peripherally related, which is, well, there's a two-part here. I'll answer the first part myself. I'll give the second part to the panel. Quote, I'm a dinosaur. Is it wrong that I don't own a smartphone and just want to communicate the old-fashioned way? I'm a psychiatrist? No. There is nothing wrong with not having a cell phone and wanting to communicate the old-fashioned way. It's a vital life skill. It's important to be able to teach people around you, including family members, kids, and grandkids, how to do this. The more important part here is the second part of the question, am I isolating myself from my children or grandchildren by not engaging with social media? Do I have to join in on the bandwagon? Which I think is an interesting question. Thoughts about pros and cons about engaging in the social media conversation with family members?
I would say no. And there are ways to use technology that don't necessarily fall into the realm of social media that are really nice connectors with families. So Skype and FaceTime, which I guess sometimes fall into that category. But I would say if you're not interested in those things, then maybe, yeah, you could be missing out on some sort of face-to-face, long-distance interconnection that I think is really nice. As for social media itself, I mean, I think it's a really personal decision, but if you feel connected to your family and that you're not missing out on sort of seeing pictures, maybe ask them to print pictures. That does still happen. And yeah, I mean, I think it's such a personal thing, and I know that a lot of people feel resistance to using social media. People, I think, are intimidated by it or think, it's too late for them to learn. I will mention that my great auntie Gert in Vancouver is, I think, 95 years old and has an Instagram account. That's right. She shares her soup recipes on it. No, I didn't. I didn't say it.
There was that question about should we take away a cell phone, and I gather that would probably come up in the example that you have.
Yes. Well, I can speak from our experience at the Family Navigation Project.
Can you speak into the mic?
Yeah. From our experience at Family Navigation, it usually doesn't bode well, especially if there's no communication. Several types of the responses have been around open dialogue and open communication. If that's just kind of between the lines of punishment, usually doesn't bode well. And in my case example, it resulted in aggression. But if there's that open dialogue about social media, about setting limits and boundaries, and schoolwork's not getting done, things like that, if it's already understood that cell phone use or internet use, things like that, are it's leisure time. It's not the bulk of what someone's doing. It's a reward. It's not what someone's born with. People are born with a cell phone. So if there's that open dialogue in between parents and youth, we find that actually goes a lot better instead of implicit understanding that if you don't act responsibly, you're getting yourself taken away.
Yeah, there's an interesting dilemma that you can sometimes find yourself in. On the one hand, as Michael was saying, people are not born with cell phones. It is not a God-given right to have one and use one or abuse one. On the other hand, because these days a substantial chunk of teens' social lives are conducted online, by cutting off their access to cell phones, essentially it's kind of like locking them in their room and cutting off the telephone. Right? They have no social, they will claim that they have no social outlet. So on the one hand, yes, you find yourself, it's going from a shot. It's basically, some teams will try and make the case you do this, it's a declaration of war. On the other hand, at the same time though, I guess under the right sorts of circumstances, if things have escalated to the point where there's a real problem, it may be necessary to do something like that. And it's a bit of a judgment call. Any thoughts on that?
I think one other thought I'll put out is there's times when we assume that the adolescent is going to, for example, I'll talk about bedtime, and they'll say, well, the parent will say, I don't want them home by 12 o'clock at night. They need to be home earlier. And then I'll have the adolescent come in and I'll say, well, you've been getting home a little bit later. What would you think would be a reasonable time to come home in the evening? And they often are not unreasonable about what they may say. I've had parents kind of look at them and the child says, well, I should be home by 10:30, when the parent already assumed that it would be 11, it would be 12 o'clock. So sometimes we make assumptions ahead of saying, I've noticed that you've been using your cell phone a lot. Can we talk about what you think is a reasonable time to turn off your phone? And I find that leads to a better communication in terms of coming up with how will we problem solve? And if you do it with your adolescent, you have a far better chance of coming up with something that both of you are comfortable with, as opposed to you walking away upset and then walking away being angry and so on.
Thank you. Okay, Michael, there's a small stack of questions here about family navigation. So if it's okay, I'm just going to lump them all up and let you tackle them all. Do you want to answer the question about how family navigation is funded, or should I do that one?
Sure you know more than I do.
I'm on the advisory board. Not advisory board, excuse me, the oversight committee. It's a combination of private donations. The Royal Bank has been sponsoring the Race for the Kids in recent years, which has been tremendously helpful. And I think that's basically about it at this point. Next question. Thank you very much. What is the impact of family navigation, apropos waiting lists and getting people in to be seen faster? How do you refer to family navigation, and what are your guys' qualifications as navigators anyway? That last was a paraphrase.
Okay, so how do you refer to family navigation? Refer to it's all self-referral, so all you need to do is call our number, and we have a booth just outside the door. Pick up a card or a brochure there.
Are you qualified?
Yeah, okay.
What are your qualifications?
Yeah, so what are our qualifications? All of our navigators, part of our team, have a graduate level education, so we come from various different backgrounds, from masters of clinical social work, masters of counseling psychology, further education, mental health and addictions, along those lines. So, and we all have experiences in different settings, so whether it's residential rehab or hospital settings, community mental health agencies, things like that. And because we all have very different experiences, that's why we regularly consult as a team.
There was one other question about whether or not going through family navigation can result in people getting services faster than just sitting in the wait list.
So it's kind of a tricky question. So
Yes, I agree.
because it's not like we don't have favoritism. It's not like because you connect with family navigation, you'll automatically be able to get a psychiatric assessment better, or we still have to deal with wait lists ourselves. However, because we have our finger on the pulse of other services going on in the system, we may be able to direct you in areas of programs that you were initially aware of. And at the same time, we're able to give you more information because we've actually connected with intake workers from different programs and agencies. So maybe a little bit more informed. Is there some ways in some situations, but we can find interim services in the meantime while you wait. So again, an emphasis on family support.
Family navigation is set up to work best with complicated cases where there are multiple different issues going on. Generally, if the issue is I need a psychiatrist, it's probably not appropriate to be invoking family navigation, but kind of like the case that Michael was presenting before, where there's mental health issues, addiction issues, family issues, service issues, et cetera, that's the kind of case where you will find that you get real benefit from involving family navigation. A comment from the audience as an FYI, there are blocking devices that are available both through internet providers, also if you're more technically inclined, often routers, the gizmos that you use to actually connect the internet to your home, allow you to block usage at certain times of day to certain devices so that you can help promote better sleep by simply not allowing internet use during those hours, making sure that children actually have non-computer time for leisure time. As the web team was commenting before, some kids are pretty tech savvy, so it may not be a perfect solution, but it is certainly something to keep in mind. And this is, of course, all assuming that the child is not capable of taking the initiative to put the devices down on their own. Question about cyberbullying. What do you do if your child is the bully? Does zero tolerance work?
I guess what you're talking about there is, again, you have to know the whole context of what's happening, how you found out that your child is the bully, what is your child actually doing, talking to your child about why this is happening, how did it start, what's going on. It's a dialogue whether the child is the victim or the child is the bully. I think that's what's important to look at. and then you take it from whatever the steps are from there. Depends on how, whether somebody else is aware of it, whether it's been disclosed. Obviously, you're going to support them in whatever is going to happen. So it really depends on the whole context.
Okay. What are we doing for time? Okay, about another 5 minutes. There's a question here about the split that some people develop between their online life and their digital life. As you were talking before about curating different images. Is there any evidence that there's a problem with this? Any thoughts about implications for real life?
So in terms
Is it a problem?
I think it can be okay, actually. I think in terms of like a professional Twitter account, for example, you may have a personal Twitter account where you share things that you share with your friends and family, and then you have a professional account where you're sharing things that are related more to your work. So I actually don't think there's like an implicit wrongness of having sort of two personas, so to speak. But I would maybe ask Dr. Billis this, but I would wonder if a teen feels that they need to hide something, and I would want to know more about that, what that conversation would look like. Like if you do discover that your teen has sort of two accounts, I think that's a pretty interesting starting point to start a dialogue about why.
I would agree with that as well.
Well, if I could interject for a second, it depends on the context, right? So, for example, if you happen to be a teen with, not that it's much of an issue these days, but with plastic surgery, but, serious cleft palate or some sort of, disfigurement from extensive burns or whatever, one might argue that there is not anything implicitly wrong with going on social media, but not necessarily putting, high-risk pictures of yourself all over. So, again, it's a question of what is the hiding for, and is there an issue with that? A question for the web team. How can you tell if your child is using a fake account? Are there signs?
Well, in terms of, if we're talking about like the Instagram, like the hidden accounts, like you might actually not be able to tell, especially what teens tend to do is the account with their real name that you can actually find them on is the one that they would probably have their parents on. I don't think there would be outright signs that your child might have a hidden account. You might end up stumbling upon it. A clue might be how often they're posting. So they post once a month on that account. It's probably fake. There's probably not a clear sign, but I think that if you know your kid and it looks like stuff that they doesn't look authentic, then it's probably not. If they're going out to hang out with their friends and they're not really posting those photos, you might wonder, where are they posting them, kind of things. Could it be a secondary account where they post their fun photos and the account that you have access to not showing their social interactions, for example?
Right, like we talked about 90% of teens using social media, so they're using it and they're using it often. So if you're not seeing much, friends hanging out pictures, then it's probably not their real account.
Another pair of questions for the web team. How common do you think that sexting is, and what do you do when teens say, quote, everyone does this?
That second one might be for Dr. Bowles.
Possibly. But how common is it, sexting? Any stats that you're aware of?
I don't have stats on hand, but I do think that it is something that is quite common. Snapchat, which we had mentioned previously, has been called the sexting app because the images disappear, which we had mentioned before is not necessarily true. They can be captured. I would say that it's something that is pretty widespread amongst teens and youth. Not a specific stat, though, to share right
And one thing I would mention that we didn't say in our talk was there are quite a few instances, and I think if there was a stat on this, it would be pretty high, is my guess, of people receiving pictures that they do not want to receive. So, you know, I don't know what the term for that is. They're not like it's non-consensual, I guess.
Pornographic spam, probably.
Pornographic spam, yeah. So unrequited, is what I'd say.
A pair of questions here. One is, how do you teach kids relevant problem-solving skills, presumptively around social media use? The other question is, how do you explain to parents about the importance of setting good, modeling good behavior for their children with respect to cell phone use as well as social media use?
I'm imagining that second question came from a grandparent if they're talking about parents. And I think, again, I will go back to what you model is more likely what other people may be more likely to follow. I guess whatever you would have been like as a parent is probably what you're seeing happening with your own children as they are parents. Again, it's going back, if I want my kids to be a certain way, I can't go and say to them, well, you shouldn't lie if I'm often telling white lies, just to give a small example. The way I do live my life is the way that my kids are going to see, and they are going to in turn say, well, if you do it, then maybe I may consider it. They may not consider it today or tomorrow, but maybe a little bit further down the road, they'll say, okay, now I can kind of understand what it was you were talking about. It takes a lot of patience to be a parent. It takes a lot of patience even as we're therapists. We have kids coming in that don't want to listen to us. And oftentimes we're inviting them to come back again and just to listen to them and find out what is it that they want to change, what is it that they feel is a concern. And often kind of putting attention onto their concerns can then allow them to be open to listening to some of your concerns and maybe make some changes from there.
Thank you. So we have 4 more cards here. We're going to run a couple minutes over time, but only a couple minutes over time. I'm going to answer the next 2 really quickly. If the panel wants to jump in, feel free. Question number 1, do youth who post all of their details of their life risk becoming narcissistic? There have been there have been comments about how essentially, well, how to put this in a concise kind of way. Anybody, 90% of everybody who posts things online probably has a vastly overblown sense of how much attention what they're posting online actually is, how much attention what they're posting online actually is receiving. In terms of becoming narcissistic, kind of depends on what you mean by narcissism.
We don't commonly see that in adolescence, so I would be inclined to say it's not promoting narcissism. I think what you again have to look at is, why is the person posting so much? Is it low self-esteem? Obviously there are people that do think very highly of themselves. But more often than not, I would say, Dr. Kleiner, we see a lot of insecurity and low self-esteem.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Sorry, I thought I had an answer all this to this question and then realized I misread one keyword there. Question number 2, what advice can you give a teen whose friend speaks of self-harm? I will give you pretty much the same answer that we tell our patients, which is that anytime that somebody seems that most teens out there, most adults out there aren't trained mental health professionals and aren't really trained to deal with issues like that. I think that where safety becomes an issue, confidentiality needs to go out the window. I think it's fair game to call the school. I think it's okay to call the parents. I think it's probably not such a good idea to be encouraging the the team to be trying to handle the situation by themselves. And I think it's important to let the teens know that, like I said, they're not trained therapists. They haven't had a decade or more of professional training in how to go about handling things like this. Okay, 3 last quick questions for the web team. Any comments at all of YouTube or other video logging in the presentations that you were making?
Yeah, so YouTube as well is a very relevant platform. There are options for live chatting and comments as well. It has been known to be a platform that can get a little bit abusive in terms of the comments that people make, heckling people for the videos that they're posting. It can also be a pretty intimate platform in terms of the videos that people post. So there are a lot of people who will post videos of their lives day to day, like video blogging kind of things as well. So I think that's something to keep in mind in terms of kind of privacy. If your child is going to be posting about their everyday life, like what they're doing, where they're going on a platform like YouTube, it's important to ensure that privacy is key in terms of location, how many details they provide about themselves, and ensuring that their other social platforms are maybe private as well, so if they're found through those channels.
Question number 2, if you receive a photo or a message that you don't want to receive, can you get rid of it completely?
So that depends on the platform. With most social media platforms, you can remove comments on your own page, and platforms like Instagram have developed things like filters so that abusive words, comments with abusive words won't show up. One platform, though, is Twitter. So Twitter is known to have a little bit of a bullying issue, not necessarily specific to teens, but people in general. You can't delete comments.
It's true. It's the adults are the people on Twitter.
It is. It is mostly an adult platform, but you can't delete a tweet. You can report tweets and on all these platforms there are guidelines for reporting abusive comments.
And then I'd also say get a screenshot of it as evidence before you delete it, just like Dr. Bullis was talking about.
The last question for the evening. This is from a senior who would fit into the category of what you were calling before a digital immigrant. Everyone seems to be comfortable with iPhones. I only use internet on my desktop. The person who is writing wants to know essentially what is required in order to get to the point of feeling comfortable if they get started from scratch on social media.
On desktop?
If they're interested in starting from scratch as a senior using social media, what's it going to take for them to become comfortable? What's it going to take for them to get to the point of being able to use it?
I'd find a digital native to walk you through it, and I would start with Facebook.
How long do you think it would take in order to get comfortable?
Not long.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about sort of the negative implications of using social media, but I think there are, it's a fun space, and that's how it started, and I think there's still quite a bit of that spirit on there, of the cool things that you can do and the cool connections that you can make. So I would certainly, if you have interest, I would certainly jump in and play around, and I mean, if you're responsible, what's the biggest mistake you're going to make as a responsible person just trying to learn? And if you have younger folks in your life who are involved, they'll tell you, as Dr. Bullis said, very quickly what you've done wrong.
Yes, for example, like leaving the caps lock key on.
Exactly.
So that brings us to the conclusion of our question and answer. I have just a few more points to make before we wrap for the evening. Recognizing the importance of learning from our patients, we have a weekly blog here at Sunnybrook called The Personal Health Navigator, written by Paul Taylor and published on our website. The blog provides advice to patients about navigating Canada's mental health system, relying heavily on medical and health experts. You can send your questions, if you have any, for the blog to askpaul@sunnybrook.ca. Please be sure to hand in your completed evaluation forms on your way out and pick up a free parking voucher in exchange. A special thanks to all the groups displaying outside the auditorium tonight, and also to our panel of speakers. They will be available to you at the front of the room for a few minutes after we're done here if you'd like to ask questions. Please visit the Sunnybrook website at www.sunnybrook.ca for updates on upcoming lectures and topics coming up in 2018. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. Have a good night.